Hello. So for this video, we're going to talk about Emily Jungmin Yoon's poetry collection, Find Me as the Creature I Am. I wanted to like this poetry collection more than I did. I don't think that's any reflection on Yoon's ability as a writer. I think she's really quite a good writer, but the style didn't really resonate that much with me. So it's an interesting poetry collection because one of the things that Yoon is very interested in is dichotomies, I guess, right? These things that are seemingly maybe in conflict with one another or in opposition to one another, but that are united in these ways. And one of the sort of recurring elements of this throughout these poems is the tension between Yoon's Korean identity and her American identity. So Yoon was born in Busan, South Korea. As far as I can tell, she's lived most of her life in the United States. She currently works in the United States at I forget which university, but it's a university in Hawaii. And those sort of tensions around identity and being Korean, being American, whatever it is, and these sort of questions of fitting in, I think underpin a lot of this sort of ethos of exploring dichotomies and conflicts and things like this. And probably the most direct exploration of this is in part 2, which is one fairly lengthy poem called I Leave Asia and Become Asian. I'm not going to read you the whole thing because it is quite long. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It's about 10 and a half pages in this book. But it sort of explores these questions of Asian identity in North America, in both the United States and Canada, because and when I say Asian in this case, I mean East Asian, really, right? Chinese, Japanese, Korean, to a certain extent, I would say maybe a lesser extent, say Southeast Asian, like Vietnamese, Cambodian, Laos, Thai, etc. Because East Asian identities in Anglophone North America, at least, I don't know if this is true in, say, Mexico, for instance, are what East Asians are a model minority, which is a really problematic conceptualization, because on the one hand, it sort of privileges East Asians as a minority group within a more dominant Anglo or European-centric culture. It identifies East Asians as better minorities than, say, people of African descent, people of Hispanic descent, people of Middle Eastern descent, whatever it is. And so on the one hand, that's beneficial for East Asians in that they do not necessarily face the same types of racial stereotypes and prejudices that many other groups do. But it's also massively, massively problematic. One, because it comes with sets of expectations and stereotypes still built into it. 2, because it, especially for women of East Asian descent, because it is massively tied to fetishization in US and probably Canadian culture. I don't know that specifically about Canada, but I assume that transcends borders to a certain extent, right? So the fetishization, and this is tied to histories of colonialism and things like this, right? You think about Madame Butterfly, et cetera, right? And so this is the kind of thing that Yoon is sort of exploring in this poem through these wide range of sort of tensions and issues. And one of the things that's so fascinating about the poem is it resists the idea of Asianness. And that makes sense, right? In, say, the US, where we have very much a racialized society, a society in which race is central to how people fit into sociocultural hierarchies, Asian is a racial classification, right? You fill out US government censuses, you apply for jobs, and among the voluntary demographic data, Asian will be one of the categories for your racial identity. Now, this is a construction, right? Yoon is not Asian. She is Korean. And that is not the same thing as Japanese or Chinese or Indian or Malaysian or whatever it is, right? Iraqi, Syrian, Israeli, all of these countries, nationalities, ethnicities are on the Asian continent. But that doesn't necessarily make them the same, apart from a sort of global accident of geography, right? So this is one of the things that she explores in the poem, is this deconstruction of the identity of Asianness, in the sense that it is sort of defined in places like the US and Canada, right? Because she, as a Korean, interacts with like, I know she talks about having Japanese friends, or the poet persona, rather, talks about having Japanese friends growing up, and not being the same, right? The culture is not the same, even if they're sort of related and mutually influential, right? In part because of the histories of conflict and trade, etc., between Korea and Japan. But right, so there's sort of these interesting fascinations with dichotomies, with the deconstruction of things that seem straightforward, things that seem maybe self-evident from a particular cultural perspective, and yet these things that are deconstructible, that can be taken apart, and the presumptions or assumptions behind them interrogated. So I do want to read you some of the poems. So again, some of the things that Yoon is really fascinated with are these sort of dichotomies, combinations of things that seem like they should be kept apart, or separations of things that maybe seem like they should be put together. So the first poem that I'm going to read you is about two things that we tend to think of ideologically as opposites that are being combined, or that sit in conjunction with one another. So this is called Love and Death Speaking at Once. We come together. To love someone means to imagine their death. 2 a.m. and you lie awake in fear of us. What if? What if? Call your mother, say you're sorry. Call your father. What? Call your sister. Memory sustains and fades. Take a picture, keep a journal, underline, dog ear, leave margin notes in your book, mark it with your touch. Do not go into a mountain alone. Write the letter that embarrasses you, adulating, undulating language, each line a petal in a dahlia, fields of swaying dahlias, you make them. Yes, you can. Give that person a bouquet of dahlias, grown then cut for you. That is us, together. We are beautiful together. If we make in you such tender-hearted anticipation, is it so bad? And so, again, the thing that's I find really striking and interesting here is, again, this sort of swirling around of these two things that we tend to think of as in opposition to one another, of life and death, or love and death in this case, more accurately. But this sort of question of how death makes love and relationships function in a sort of strange, paradoxical type way, right? That love is driven by this fear of loss, that it is deeply sort of interpolated by the anxiety about the death of the beloved. And yet, we try and sort of cope with that. We try and make that love function by putting off the conception of death. And so what the poem is doing, and what the poem is interested in, is this idea that you can't do that, right? You can't put off the concept of death by imagining it does not exist, or by imagining that love is some sort of antidote to it. They mutually coexist. And I think that's a really important component of it. Okay, so the next one that I'm gonna read you isn't quite in the same vein of sort of taking opposites and putting them together, but it is about finding connections across sort of disparate experiences and looking at them as a cohesive whole in order to make meaning out of them. So this is called The Blades. You cut down on the gopher in a single crisp stroke in the garden, in it also your mother's prized orange tree, a blue jay your family feeds and has trained. I picture the gopher no longer struggling in the trap, inside the water pipe for the sprinkler, throbbing over grass and stones. Then you must have slid open the door to the dining room, leaned the shovel on the tree. I heard this story years ago in California. In the time of pandemic, alone together, I read too much news. Trump defends Chinese virus label. Woman assaulted in Manhattan, blamed for COVID-19. Racism is a virus. I obsess knowing our place as Asians in this country, the exemplar minority with advanced degrees and gadgets, a superior meekness, knowing our desirability was built to reassert Western centrality, that too a type of technology. To keep us in check, a Texas man took it on himself and stabbed an Asian father and two sons, cutting their faces open. One of the children has a gash pointing to his eye, the damage itself in the shape of a blade, a delta wanting to breach another opening. Watch the wild turkeys roam the neighborhood, unconcerned, banal, and ugly. Yet you love these animals. When your friend's old cat died, you had cried. He was 18, he had a good, adored life. You had mourned so for someone else's animal, so when your mother told me at the dining table about the gopher, I was shocked. But that too was kindness, your shovel, for the slowly dying animal injured beyond saving, for entering the human world in the shape of a pipe, a wet reach to a diorama of the natural world. Embarrassed and ashamed, you looked away. As we sat in that moment, two Koreans in a white world, I wanted to marry you, to protect the person who loves like no other. Foolish and naive, yes. Every day someone leans the shovel and knife, real and not, against a gentler thing, after striking another that looks like us, for crawling too close out of the technology they built. Yet today, feeling momentarily safe in our room, I can ask what you did with the gopher. You buried the animal, you said, or you say, in the same earth it came from. So again, we've got these sort of dichotomies of combination and separation, of finding connections between things that might on their surface seem quite different, right? Because Especially in Western cultures, we tend to think of humans as separate from animals, right? While we know biologically that we are animals, we have an ideological commitment to the idea that we are a separate thing. But the sort of experiences of suffering, of mourning, of pain show how much of a lie that is, right? And I think Yoon is really sort of interested in these ideas of how differences are brought together, bridges are created, distinctions are transcended, etc., etc.